Good afternoon. Welcome to Robots and Red Tape. I'm your host, Nick Shutt, here today. Happy to have the wonderful Dr. Raymond Sheh. Raymond, if you wouldn't mind, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got here?
Sure. Thank you for having me on. This is was a good opportunity to talk with people who are sort of, interested in these kinds of topics. I'm currently the uncrewed aircraft systems research lead at NIST's Public Safety Communications Research Division, or PSCR. NIST, as some of your listeners may be aware, is the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, and so develops standards for all kinds of things, from concrete through to the performance of robots. Um, the clock in your computer and your cell phone synchronizes ultimately to an atomic clock that's maintained by NIST in Boulder, Colorado, for instance.
Oh, that's cool.
NIST is a sort of a big player in the measurement sciences.
Mhm.
I've been working with NIST for a while now, in the field of measuring how robots perform, specifically robots for response, so search and rescue, and hazardous materials and things like that. So prior to that, I did a PhD in machine learning for robot behavior. So, how does in this case, how does a robot learn how to drive itself
Mhm.
over rough terrain? So that's, things that, it's a bit like a human trying to climb over a pile of rocks. You
Mhm.
kind of have to look and you have to think, right? You can't, it's not generally, I mean, unless you're a parkour expert,
Yeah.
you're not, you're not doing this while you're having a conversation with someone, looking off to the side like you would walking down the street. So that's kind of my background. AI, machine learning, have a fairly strong interest also on the cybersecurity side of the house. Insofar as it's always it's always been fun to see where, where the, where things can happen in these systems that shouldn't happen, and then how to prevent it.
Mhm.
So in the midst of all that, I was also a teaching academic for a while, and teaching artificial intelligence and cybersecurity and software engineering and
Mhm.
robotics and all that fun stuff.
Absolutely.
Uh,
That's fantastic. Really interesting background. Really appreciate you being here. And we talk a lot, and you hear a lot about it in the news and in just in the world at large about AI and generative AI and artificial intelligence. But one thing that I don't hear a lot of people talking about is like, what does that mean? So can you, in your professional opinion, like define AI? What is it? What is it not? And how should we classify these systems in our heads?
So I often sort of say that the term AI is a bit like the term football.
Mhm.
We're not going to agree, right?
Yeah.
I'm from Australia,
Yeah.
so good day, everyone.
Mhm.
From where I come from, football is played with a ball and primarily moving it around by kicking the thing with your feet.
Mhm.
Whereas the Europeans would argue, no, the ball has to be round and you're not
Mhm.
supposed to touch it with your hands. Whereas around here, apparently it's neither round nor primarily moved with the feet.
Yeah.
So, and I think we've sort of agreed to disagree around the world on that. And that really it only matters when you're trying to figure out which game you're supposed to be playing at a particular time. And so I think the term AI, or artificial intelligence, has kind of taken on that same property, where different disciplines and different areas and different commentators will define it differently, right? Some people define it as the goal, the striving to create something that replicates either human abilities or replicates human abilities in the same way that a human does, or at least resembles that. Some people sort of talk about that as artificial general intelligence, I guess. Um, Other people refer to it as using computing systems to replicate parts of some tasks that humans have, that are traditionally what humans do, or that are traditionally hallmarks of human thought, human cognition, human perception. Um, so there are lots of definitions out there.
Mhm.
And really, I think, to my mind, AI is sort of just the topic of, computers doing complicated stuff that we don't immediately know the answer to.
Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
and within, once it gets much beyond that, now you've got to really figure out from context or from the definitions of the whoever you're talking with. Okay, so what type of AI are we actually talking about? Just like, we have to ask, so which type of football are we actually talking
Yeah.
about?
Mhm.
I actually find it more useful though to talk about differences in artificial intelligence systems from the perspective of what it actually means for a given purpose or for a given risk. So, for example, um, let's say we're talking now. One of my big things here is AI risk management. So that
Mhm.
is, how do you manage the risks relative to improved capabilities
Mhm.
of AI systems? And one big distinction that I like to make is the difference between AI systems where you can do root cause analysis on failure. So when it goes wrong, you can figure out exactly why it went wrong, and then
Mhm.
ideally actually fix it in a way that's provable. Versus the systems where you kind of just have to shrug your shoulders and go, okay, it messed up there. We don't quite know why, but okay.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a lot of people tend to be quite surprised by how impenetrable some of these systems are and how you can't really tell why they went wrong. And all you can really do is just add more guardrails around it.
Mhm.
But now you don't know sort of where those guardrails should start and end because you kind of don't know where similar mistakes are going to be made.
Right.
Um, so that's sort of one sort of split in the AI side of the house that I find particularly informative to think about.
Mhm.
Related to that, of course, are the AI systems that you can or can't fix in a provable way.
Mhm.
Some of these systems you can throw more examples at it
Right.
to correct these errors, but then you don't necessarily know. Okay, but would a somewhat similar situation, will it make the same mistake?
Mhm.
And now would a completely different situation where it would have done the right thing before, has this additional data now skewed it to the point that it would mess that up?
Mhm.
Um, so, versus other AI systems where you can put provable bounds around what it will and won't do in different situations, versus more classical mathematical analytical techniques where you
Mhm.
can have, it might not have as rich a representation of the world,
Mhm.
but you can make stronger proofs around it. The other
Absolutely.
thing I will stress, by the way, is that AI is not just deep learning.
Mhm.
It's not just generative AI. It's not just machine learning. It's not just statistical machine learning.
Mhm.
There are many techniques for achieving things that a lot of us would call AI that are not whatever is currently topical, right? And
Right.
I mean, I'm sure some of your listeners have been in this game long enough to have seen the different, flavors of the month, year, or decade as far as AI is concerned.
Absolutely.
Bit of a long-winded answer, but
100%. One thing
hope
you
that
did
sets the scene.
touch yeah, one
I'm
thing
sorry.
you did touch on there, Raymond, which I found interesting, is the difference between explainable, AI systems and not. Can you give us a little bit of, and give the listeners a little idea around, some of the potential, impacts, especially as it relates to, public safety, explainable AI versus not, let's just say AI that's less explainable or not explainable at all could have, because, I think that it's great, and, talking about the differences is great. However, I think that like having a real world example of the potential downsides or upsides of either is just really great.
Yeah, so I mean, explainable AI is because was a I guess it's not such a topical buzzword now. But I think it was
Mhm.
very topical for about for a few years there,
Yeah. Black.
and and I mean, everyone was talking about oh, the AI is explainable. We can figure out why it's doing the thing and how it works.
Yeah.
And which is all very exciting. The problem is that now we've come across the problem where people don't use the same definition for the term explainable, right?
Mhm.
Um, and you only need to look as far as humans talking with each other to realize that the term explanation is a fraught one as well, right?
Mhm.
Um, one distinction I make is the difference between the explanation, that is the actual reason why the thing happened,
Mhm.
versus an explanation, which is something that is consistent with the observation or consistent with a set of observations, but doesn't necessarily have a grounding in the underlying reason why the thing happened. Now, if we're explaining things like why is the sky blue? Well, of course, there is the explanation, which is a scientific one, and then there's the one that you have in the nursery rhyme, which sounds good, and there's not much harm done at that point.
Hmm.
If you're talking though about why did an AI system make the wrong decision, you kind of want the explanation because you need to be able to figure out why it made that
Hmm.
incorrect decision and how to do something about it next time around.
Hmm.
And part of the problem is that the discussion around explainable AI has kind of been muddied by people talking about systems that will give that are designed to give explanations that are consistent with the observation, but are consistent with the output, but that don't have any insight into the underlying decision-making process or have
Hmm.
limited insight. Because now, and the problem now is that you're giving people a false sense of security, right? You're giving them an explanation that might sound good, but it doesn't help them to predict when the system might do something wrong, and it doesn't help them to figure out how to prevent the system from making a mistake or how to fix it. So that's sort of one dimension of explainability that people kind of sometimes forget. The next one, of course, is one of how useful is the explanation at all?
Right.
Um, right. And again, we have to look as far as humans here, where an explanation that might be very informative to an expert might be completely impenetrable to to someone who's not an expert. And now it's a question of, well, what's the explanation? Who's the explanation for, right?
Hmm.
If you're trying to explain something to an investigator, if the system is explaining something to an investigator, then yes, you might potentially be able to have a system that only gives explanations where it requires significant expertise to understand the explanation. Whereas if the explanation is intended for a system that's explaining something to a person who's not an expert with the intent that they should be able to make a decision fairly quickly as to whether to trust the system,
Hmm.
now you kind of have a problem because now you have to have an explanation that is understandable to a non-expert.
Hmm.
I mean, you can take this to its logical extreme, right? Any system running on a deterministic computer, that is a computer that's not doing random things,
Hmm.
is explainable insofar as is that it's ultimately just electronic circuits, but that explanation is not at a level of abstraction that's useful for very many people.
Right.
Um, so there's
Hmm.
that axis of explanation also that can get tricky, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes you have partial explanations, like there you have a system that might make a decision, and it will at least tell you, I looked at these factors,
Right.
right? It won't necessarily tell you why those factors were important. It won't necessarily tell you what it was about those factors that was important. It might say, this is a picture of a cat. Okay,
Hmm.
which bits of the picture were interesting? And it
Hmm.
might highlight the ears and the tail and might highlight some random piece somewhere. And you'll
Hmm.
go, well, why was that random piece over there interesting to you at all? It was not even part of the cat, right? And
Hmm.
you can't ask it that. Or you
Right.
could ask it, but it won't give you a useful answer.
Correct.
But that then leads into the next bit of it, and that is you have the explanation that tells you why did it make that decision then
Hmm.
versus how did it come up with the knowledge of that, right?
Hmm.
You know, back to my cat example, you've got this, convolutional neural network thing that's saying this is a picture of a cat. And it can say, I looked at these bits in this instance, and that's why it was a cat.
Hmm.
Then you get other systems that might be able to say, okay, why was this bit interesting? It
Hmm.
was interesting because it was this, that, and the other. Okay. Why was that a factor? And then it could lead you right back to its training data, right?
Hmm.
So again, now you've got a depth of explanation there because now you can start doing things like figuring out if there were mistakes being made when the
Hmm.
system was created and trained. I mean, you can see a theme here, right? Where it's a case question of when the system makes a decision, how far back in the chain can you verify that things were correct? And
And
I
I
think
think,
that's one of the big issues that we face.
yeah, and I think if you're building a system to define a cat in a picture, that's a
Mm.
very low stakes game, right? But I think if
Yep.
you start looking at some of the things that you're doing and
Yep.
the when you, yeah, as applied to robotics, right?
Yep.
in public safety, and you start thinking about not being able to understand why, why the rover decided to go back to your example, why the rover decided to go up this specific path and it fell. I mean, again, if you're training here, training and testing it here at your HQ up there in Gaithersburg, I think that's also pretty low stakes. But if it's the software that's, say, on the Mars rover, or, now all of a sudden, it's not like you can just go out there and flip it back over, right? And so I think that there are absolutely a lot more high stakes areas where, we have to kind of do better at a lot of this to help, uh, to help, especially as we, start moving forward and help apply it to other things that are higher stakes.
Definitely, and certainly public safety is a good example of one where the stakes can get quite high. For example, if you're having some kind of system that's looking for lost people in the forest, and you have having people there actually looking at the screens, it's a lot of attention. It's a lot of and especially if it's a big area,
Hmm.
and using AI, using machine vision can be very helpful here.
Hmm.
But of course, now you kind of really need to know if the system didn't find something there, was it because there wasn't something there, or was it because the system missed something, right?
Hmm.
How confident is the system in its, in a sense, here we're less worried about the system giving you a false positive. You're more worried about how certain is that the system didn't give you a false negative.
Hmm.
And having an explanation as to, you know, why a particular area was cleared, along with what the levels of certainty were and what were the characteristics that were looked at, could be very important. One of the big sort of issues that we often see, especially as I mean, AI machine learning being democratized and being widely available is great, but
Hmm.
the problem now is that often context gets lost in terms of you have a model or you have a system that was developed for this context, and then people try and apply it elsewhere. A system might be trained in a particular environment, and now someone takes this system and uses it in an environment that they might think is the same, but is different in just the right way.
Hmm.
The system is no longer quite as accurate or doesn't behave quite as well. And having the explanations or having the transparency in there to say, hey, you're using, you train me in, in the the deserts of Australia, and
Hmm.
now you're deploying me in Nevada. Things are different enough that I'm not quite so sure about this.
Right.
Having the system being able to explain that and be transparent about that is very important. It could be a difference between the seasons. It can be a different, and here's one of the big dangers, right? Is that the things that trick these systems are not immediately obvious to humans. And my back when I used to teach machine perception, I actually had a big section on illusions, right?
Hmm.
Because looking at illusions gives you a lot of insight into how a particular entity or particular agent's perception works, right? We learn a lot about how we perceive the world by looking at the things that trick us, right? All of those magicians tricks, all of those, books where oh, are these two things the same size? Or, look at this pattern and you can see spots where there aren't spots and all that fun stuff, right? That is all about teaching us, well, okay, well, how is it that we perceive the world, and how can we be tricked into seeing something that's not there, or
Hmm.
vice versa? And we're used to that, right? And we build our environment to avoid that. That's why we have bright orange traffic cones. That's
Hmm.
right. That's why we have retroreflectors on things, because they're there to prevent accidental illusions from having us not see the obstacle on the road.
Right.
Um, Artificial intelligence systems, machine perception systems, have a different set of illusions, and those are not immediately obvious to people who are deploying these often.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
being able to have the systems explain what they're seeing so that we can get visibility into what these illusions are
Hmm.
is very important, not just for public safety. I mean, self-driving cars are a big thing here. Have been very topical about this as well,
Hmm.
and the kinds of cases where they just don't see things that they should be seeing. Well, how did they miss them?
Hmm.
So, but no,
Absolutely.
you're right.
Yeah, and I think, I forget what show it was on, but, self-driving cars, I mean, that's just getting tested out on the road, and, like, if we're testing, if you have to sign up to be in a beta test of anything, right? Like, that's
Mhm.
part of the process, but, the dude, I say dude, the person driving the Tesla may have signed up, but you didn't sign up while you're walking down the street, neither did I, and neither did
Mhm.
the children that are playing that are playing in the playground, and just have no idea how those things are going to interact. And I think that self-driving cars is a great example of where AI just is not quite there yet because of the number of edge cases, right? Like driving just takes there's so many things that can happen that are so unexpected. And being right 95% of the time is again great when you're defining pictures of a cat. Not
Mhm.
great when you're looking at, when you're
Well,
looking for survivors in the woods using a drone or using, computer vision to scan satellite images for people lost in the ocean. Really not great when you're driving a car.
exactly. And I think this is where having um, this is one of those situations where the technologies kind of run ahead of, as a society, the discussion about what is deemed an acceptable level of risk, right? I mean, when you go out when you go out into society, when you go out into the world, you're accepting a certain level of risk, right? I mean, you know, humans are not perfect drivers either. You're accepting a certain level of risk associated with the understanding of the proficiency of the people around you.
Hmm.
The thing is that that's moderated by the fact that we have laws around licensing and proficiency, driver proficiency training, and you have to keep your car roadworthy and so on and so forth, right? So
But
there
also,
are guardrails being put in place by society so that when you go out there,
Mhm.
you know the level of risk that you're exposing yourself to.
Also, we're driving the car and we have some level of control over if
Yeah,
that person is, not doing well. I can move away from him, move back, whatever,
right.
right? And I
Yeah.
don't know how much a computer would be able to do that.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking more at a more fundamental level
Hmm.
is that we don't have that guardrail for we do have that guardrail, but that guardrail is not as well defined for self-driving cars, right? We and as a society, we're not. I don't know that we've accepted with full information what kind of risk we're bringing on with these now. The part of the issue here is that these systems have actually crept in very over time, right?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I drive a car that's a 2015 vehicle, and it has basic collision avoidance and adaptive cruise. It is doing some machine vision looking in front of it. Of course, it's very basic. I'm still in control of the vehicle, and I'm still responsible for stopping the vehicle. And so I'm still paying attention, and it's a convenience.
Hmm.
Um, so in that sense, that's sort of you know, the world hasn't accepted an additional risk of me using that because I'm still the one in charge.
Hmm.
As opposed to, we're now talking about vehicles with no driver in them.
Hmm.
And as a pedestrian, you don't necessarily know now, hey, that thing, I better be careful, right? And that's quite a departure because I mean, the society is used to having vehicles on the road doing strange things, right?
Hmm.
They're called, fire trucks. They have and ambulances. Like they have lights and sirens on them.
Right.
And so when you hear the sirens and you see the lights, you know that there's something weird that's going to happen. There's
Mhm.
going to be something behaving in a way that is not usual,
Right.
and you can adjust your risk. You're going to adjust your behavior
Hmm.
to be mindful of this risk. You pull over, or as a pedestrian, you step back,
Hmm.
so on and so forth, right? Public safety is very used to this idea of risk management. And that's not risk minimization, right? Clearly, driving a 20-ton vehicle the wrong way down Main Street through red lights is not minimizing the risk of driving. It's minimizing the overall risk relative to the bigger risk of not getting to the burning building in time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, of course, the license sirens are about society joining them in that risk management. Um, I don't think as a society we've figured that out for these AI systems yet. I mean, the- how many self-driving cars have blocked in emergency services vehicles, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, and this goes both ways too. I mean, public safety also hasn't figured out how to best use AI in a risk managed way either in
Hmm.
that same manner, right? They know that if they're going to be doing weird things that are, against what society expects in terms of driving, they know that but they know that the person doing it is trained. They know that the vehicle is being maintained to a high level of mechanical condition,
Hmm.
and they have regulations around when they're supposed when they do that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, what does that look like for the AI that they need to use?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
no, so and this is where it's important to have
Hmm.
guidance, regulations, frameworks, governance
Yeah.
to define this, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't employ firefighters to be AI experts. We employ firefighters to be good firefighters,
Correct.
right?
Absolutely.
It's not their job to figure this out.
Hmm.
Um, you know,
100%.
and I think that's where it's important for those of us who do have familiarity with this to step up, but also then for the folks who have a stake in this,
Absolutely.
to join in making sure that these frameworks and guidances and other governance artifacts are reflect as a society what we what is acceptable and what kinds of risks we want to take on and what are the sets of ethics and so on that we want to accept, right? Because I mean, for every, this is going to help XYZ, but this brings on additional risks. And those risks might include things like, ethics and privacy and,
Hmm.
being able to fix errors, fix mistakes, right? Um, if the system, you know, keeps thinking that your house is on fire when it isn't, and it keeps sending firefighters to your house when they don't need to be there,
Yeah.
you kind of want to be able to fix that.
Correct.
Or if the emergency routing system keeps trying to route fire trucks down down the lane next to your house that's too narrow for it,
Hmm.
you kind of want to be able to fix that.
So what do you think about, yeah, and you touched on risk management frameworks a moment ago. What do you think about NIST, AI, RMF, and and the new cybersecurity framework that they just came out with, and also, would you talk a little bit about the working group that you established and what your goals were and why you did that and why, and I think last time we were speaking, Remy, you'd also mentioned what why you think that having diverse skill sets involved in creating things like this is so important.
Yeah, so I would say my colleagues over at the NIST IT laboratory, ITL, and the NCCOE have done a marvelous job with the AI risk management framework and the cybersecurity framework 2.0.
Mhm.
And they've still created these as general frameworks to guide the community as a whole, not just public safety, but guide the community as a whole as to how to contextualize all of these risks. And the idea is that they're frameworks that you put things into, but they show you the extents of the problem.
Mhm.
They help to make sure that you're not missing something somewhere. And so in that sense, they're incredibly, incredibly valuable. But the thing that makes them actually usable by a broader community of non-AI and non-cybersecurity experts are what they call the community and organization profiles. That is, um, documents that are developed in collaboration with the communities, with the stakeholders that take this framework and slot in what is meaningful for a particular application, a particular community, or a particular organization.
Mhm.
So what I was doing was I established a working group at NIST for producing profiles and guidance and other resources
Mhm.
for cybersecurity and AI risk management for uncrewed aircraft systems in public safety. So
Mhm.
the goal was to generate one of these community profiles. And actually, I had the particularly sort of fun idea that so I'm both an AI guy and a cybersecurity guy.
Mhm.
And to me, AI and cybersecurity risks are greater than the sum of the parts.
Mhm.
And so my goal was to create one profile document that related to both AI and cybersecurity risks, mentioning them together when relevant. Of course,
Mhm.
there are some things that have to be treated separately, of course, but
Right.
there are things that have to be treated together. And in creating these, it's vital to have input, not just from the cybersecurity and AI experts, but also from the user community, from the manufacturers, and vendors, from the trainers. A lot of this is about educating the end users as to what do these risks mean and how does it affect their deployments.
Mhm.
It means consulting with regulators. We were working with the FAA. It
Mhm.
involves working with community groups. It involves the ethics community, for instance. We had the ACLU involved in this working group as well,
Mhm.
because there are some very important ethical questions to be answered when it comes to using AI in these situations for not just for drones, but generally. And also in terms of what levels of cybersecurity risk are we willing to take on and then take on behalf of other people. So that's kind of how that chain kind of works, right? So my sort of my colleagues at NIST have developed this sort of overall framework, and then folks like me and other people, put in make these profiles. And the thing
Mhm.
is, the profiles can be created by any group, right? And
Right.
sometimes they can be internal. Private organizations can create their own profiles that define, where they are and where they want to be
Mhm.
and use these frameworks as a way of contextualizing and structuring that discussion.
Mhm.
Um, it can come from community organizations. It can come from a wide variety of places. I mean, I'm. It's unfortunate actually that uh, I'm not sure if some of your listeners may be aware that NIST received a fairly significant budget shortfall in its latest round of funding. So unfortunately, this working group that we set up to do this very important work for public safety is now on indefinite hiatus. So when they talk about funding being cut from a particular agency, this is unfortunately the kind of stuff that can sometimes get cut.
Unfortunately.
So unfortunately, that effort is on hiatus. But if other organizations want to take this ball and run with it, be it for public safety or in other areas, this is open for people to do. Um, and actually, NIST recently hosted a seminar on creating community profiles. In that case, it was for the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. These resources are online. NIST regularly runs seminars and things on the topic. So,
Mhm.
this is all very important stuff.
Absolutely. No, 100%. It really, really is. Especially, I think, tying it back to the public safety piece and unmanned aerial vehicles or uncrewed aircraft systems is um I think that they're just gonna continue to become more prevalent in society, right? And for a lot of stuff, like you can, some of the areas that I've thought about and I know have been, done is like, instead of having somebody climb a tower to, do the climbing towers to either, inspect the integrity of cell phone towers and radio towers, things like that, send a drone up to do that, right?
Yep.
Now I think we have drone pilots doing it, but eventually one day we would just, it won't be that way. And I'm not even sure what else they can be used for in a public safety sector, but again, having more of them overhead, and I know the FAA is involved in regulating where they can and cannot fly, but like, you really want to make sure that there's a strong framework and strong guidance for the private sector to develop these things. And it's unfortunate that NIST is one of the ones that's not on that, that doesn't just, let's just say, receive unlimited funding like some other agencies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the joys of government funding, right, is that
Mhm.
the folks who are sort of deciding the top line number often don't sort of have an understanding of what's going on underneath.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it's and I mean, it's also becoming very topical right now because there's a lot of discussion in the drone community around security, and a lot of it's focused on geopolitics, which has some merit, but it's not the only thing out there, right?
Mhm.
Just because a system is manufactured in a particular location doesn't automatically mean it's secure. Just because a system was secure leaving the factory doesn't
Mm.
mean it's secure in deployment.
Right.
You know, so um, I think one of the issues that's sort of pervaded the discussion around specifically around uncrewed aircraft systems or drones in public safety
Hmm.
has been this focus on this country of origin topic, and that's kind of sucked the oxygen away from other things that are arguably just as important, such as how secure are the systems you're connecting it to,
Hmm.
right? How
Yeah.
secure are the practices that you're using to deploy this?
Hmm.
Is the system that you're using actually capable of doing the job,
That's
right?
pretty important.
It's That's kind of important,
Yeah.
and certainly the previous project I was working on, doing the standard test methods for response robots. A big chunk of that was, you know, is this particular piece of equipment and pilot combination
Hmm.
likely to be capable of achieving the goal of the mission?
Hmm.
Kind of fundamental. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter how secure the system is if that combination isn't going to achieve the mission, there's no point deploying it, right?
Right. Absolutely. It's like
Um,
having a whole
it's
bunch of nails to hammer in, and all you get is a screwdriver, right? Like
Yeah. I
it
mean,
doesn't matter. You can make it work, maybe,
you can make it
maybe.
work maybe, but it ain't going to be pretty, and it probably
Nope.
won't work very well.
It won't be
So,
efficient by any stretch of the imagination.
right, right. So, yeah, so and then at that point, then it becomes but it becomes a question of, okay, in that case, is the capability worth the risk?
Hmm.
And the thing is, that's a decision that should be made deliberately, right? It shouldn't. It's not a question that should be answered. So it's not a decision that should be made by default, or a decision that's made by the world for you when you deploy the system and it doesn't work,
Hmm.
right? Because now
100%.
you've wasted time and resources that you could have, deployed, you know, some other asset to answer that question.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so I think that it's, I'm not going to sort of go into the merits of the actual geopolitical argument,
Hmm.
except to say that that shouldn't be at the expense of everything else in the risk management and capability discussion.
I agree, and I think back to your point about the geopolitical. I think the geopolitical piece absolutely has a place. And I mean, you look at for and depending on the use of the tool, right? Like you look at how drones have been utilized in Ukraine recently in the conflict, in the war there with Russia. You know, I think, if you're deploying a drone on a battlefield, yes, it absolutely 100%, you absolutely should be making it here from a geopolitical perspective. Um, and also looking at everything that you'd mentioned around are your systems secure? Is your software secure? Can it be hijacked? What is what is the custody, right? It goes back to, like, you think about police evidence, right? As they collect evidence, if the chain of custody is broken, that evidence is tossed out because it could have been altered, right?
Mhm.
There needs to be a lot of transparency into all of that. But I also think that just because we're talking about like a defense application, like not all the drones are going to be used in that way, and so we're not all, and so we need to look at and evaluate each use case differently and evaluate them all, and understanding that what you're using the tool for depends on, the geopolitical piece should be more involved or less, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's part of the problem here is people like a one size fits all when it doesn't really work, right? I mean, there
Right.
again, and there are
Mean,
some there
easy,
is
convenient answers that don't actually answer the question that
no,
just
I mean
make you
that's where
feel comfortable are a thing here. Ooh.
no, I mean that's where security theater comes from, right? But I get it, right? We also do want to cultivate a vibrant sort of industry here that actually works, and there are. I mean, I to be clear, I think that there are other problems as well with the way that innovation can sometimes be approached with that in that
Mhm,
kind of field, right? I mean, this country definitely has the expertise to build all this stuff.
mhm,
Um, it's just a lot of it tends to get locked away as well,
mhm,
and be unavailable to the commercial space.
mhm.
Um, and without the commercial space, you're not going to get the economies of scale and so on.
Right.
Um, you also get the problem of the who are the who are the superstars of that the community looks up to, right? It's the I have a I have a little bit of a problem with places where the universities where the football coach is being paid an order of magnitude more than more than the professor who's training up the next generation of entrepreneurs, right? I mean,
Mhm.
there's that kind of sort of cultural thing that I have that I think is also a hurdle that needs to be overcome. Um,
I agree.
so no, I mean, it's a complicated question, right? And so that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to answer the geopolitical one here, except to say that there are other things to be considered as well, and that it can't be a one size fits all necessarily.
Mhm.
The chain of custody argument that you made actually is also a good one on the AI risk management side that I think people aren't necessarily aware of.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, any of your listeners who have a recent cell phone,
Mhm.
now try this experiment where you take a picture of a sign that has different sizes of text on it, and you zoom it in, right? And so you at a distance where you can't really read everything.
Mhm.
In the old days, it would just get blurry, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, it'll try and use AI to sharpen the image. And
Hmm.
so often you'll get things on the sign that look like language, but clearly aren't what was written there.
Interesting.
And so now you're taking like a default setup of a phone. You haven't turned anything on. You take a picture, and now all of a sudden that picture has been augmented with AI.
Mhm.
What does that do to your chain of custody? Right? What
That's a
does
great.
that do to your evidence? How does that play into, even if even if the picture was taken with a device that doesn't do that, how can we now be sure that that hasn't happened,
Mhm.
right? That let's say someone took a picture and you zoom in and you say, "Oh, I recognize that person."
Mhm.
Is that actually that person, or did AI kind of make it sharper and make it look like that person?
Right.
Or worse yet, the other way around, that is, you're looking for someone, a drone's looking for someone, and they see someone, you take a picture, you zoom in and say, "Oh, that's not that person." When in actual fact, it was that person. It was
Mhm.
just really blurry, so you wouldn't have recognized them necessarily. But AI has gone in and filled it in and make it definitely not look like that person, and they've ignored it rather than gone and
Mhm.
investigated further. I'm not saying that's happening just yet. I don't know that it's not happening just yet, but
Right.
again, these are AI risks that need to be considered, and especially for public safety,
Mhm.
where you have this importance of the image being either faithful or at least knowingly insufficient, so you can go in and say, "I still don't know," versus
Right.
accidentally ruling it out.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, from again, thinking public safety, you think about, and I don't know it for a fact, but I assume that there's facial recognition software in running on on the security systems in places like train stations and airports and things like that, right? Comparing it to, I'm not sure what database is out there they would compare it to, but then you start thinking about, people on watch lists, right? Or people that are wanted for kidnapping somebody or kidnapping a child and they're fleeing. And now all of a sudden, like how, with, things like that, or, not. And then also back to what we were talking about earlier around explainable processes and understanding why AI systems are identifying things in different ways. What are some of the, there's huge public safety risks there. You can't trust a person to memorize, 50,000 faces and compare it against all of them all at once, right? But, at the same time, you hope that the system that's doing it is going to have, like a 99.9, I'm not sure how many nines you would need there to make it, to mitigate that risk because I mean, you go out to places like that, you only need to look at the last 25 years of history to understand what has happened, and the implications of not having a good grip on who is where and putting all of these systems together so they can all talk to each other and understand and compare the same kind of data, right?
Yeah, and the problem of the question of this sort of mass surveillance and mass sort of facial recognition and so on is kind of scary.
Terrifying.
I and it's scary on several levels, right? There's the one level of, you're being tracked everywhere you go, which
Mhm.
really makes me uncomfortable. Ignoring the fact that, on a daily basis I carry around multiple electronic devices that know
Oh,
exactly where
right.
I am as
Yeah.
well.
It's
Um,
tied to you, and then, your
but
Facebook or your Instagram or whatever all
yeah,
have access to that location data,
yeah.
so on.
I
It's
mean,
wild.
yeah, I mean, we all say that, we value our privacy, but how much convenience are we willing, what is the price of that privacy? Well, evidently it's a little bit of convenience, right?
Mhm.
Um, But I think for me, the more immediate question, the more immediate problem is knowing how well these systems are or aren't even working,
Mm,
right? Um, the question of how well do these systems work for instance, for people who don't look like the majority of the people it was trained on.
mhm,
How often does it make mistakes? How often does it make, get people confused and, bring about a public safety response when a response isn't warranted?
mhm,
Versus how often does it miss things? How can, if someone is found to be, regularly, mixed up with other people in this, what is the recourse for that? How do you fix it? How do you, I don't know that we have that much. I mean, apart from possibly some jurisdictions that have sort of, decided that it's not worth the risks.
mhm.
Um, I think that we need more confidence as a society that this is, into how well this is working or not, as a case may be. And I think that the part of the problem is that as a society, we're not being, we're not, on the one hand, we're not being invited to be at the table of that discussion, but on the other hand, we're also not putting out the information that lets people be informed.
Yeah,
And that's scary. I'm in this space in terms of AI, and it's hard to keep up with this. And I
yeah,
think this is one of the issues of this society getting more and more complicated, right? Is how do we
yeah,
make these decisions, and
absolutely.
how do we have the information to make these decisions?
Yeah,
Having you know IT proficiency or computer science proficiency or AI proficiency, um, it's becoming important. But then again, all the other stuff we had to be proficient about didn't get any less important.
correct. Absolutely.
Um,
No, and I
so
mean,
so
great,
what?
great example is like that's why we have people that are UI experts, right? You can build the greatest computer system in the world, but generally back-end developers are not the best, or full stack folks are not the best at making something user friendly, right? And so you have to, and that's where all the human-centered design comes from, and all of that aspect, right? And that's why I think, and something I know you've touched on is why it's so important to have multiple skill sets at the table, right? And I think
Yep.
also multiple having a representation of the people that you serve is big. It's huge, right? It's like you want to
Yep.
understand why things are going the way they are, why they're going well, why they're not. What factors should we take into account? And that's why having ubiquity in any way, as far as gender, culture, background is problematic. And a book I'm actually listening to right now is called Range, which I was someone who's going to be on the podcast in the next week or two. She turned me onto it. It's really interesting. It's all about why generalists is the subtitle is why generalists succeed in a highly specialized world. The point that the reason I bring that up is there is one of the chapters, a gentleman, the author's talking about a gentleman who did research at a whole bunch of, he went and went to a bunch of research labs all over the world for like 5 or 6 years, sat in their meetings, sat together, and became so integrated into the labs that, like, when he didn't show up to a meeting, like, some of the researchers would reach out and be like, "Hey, are you okay? Where are you?" And they would send him updates about if times changed, whether he wanted to or not. And his whole goal was to figure out why some labs perform better than others, right? The most interesting point his conclusion was that the labs that did the most diverse research and had the most diverse skill sets on staff were the ones that were more productive. When all you had were, say, physicists, and you had 150 physicists with all the same background from the same kinds of schools, all looking at the same problem, they were far less productive than folks with, physics backgrounds and biology backgrounds and chemistry backgrounds, all of them, because you're able to approach the problem from a bunch of different aspects and a bunch of different angles all at the same time, and get different kind of associations and different kind of leaps and different logic and different approaches, which leads to more productive scientific research.
No, I fully agree, and I think that having because you have to have people ask questions, and
Hmm.
the whole adage of no such thing as a dumb question. It's more a question of you have to have ask questions that make people think, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes the dumb questions are the ones that make you think. And they go, well, why do we do it that way?
Right.
Right?
Oh, that's one of my
Um,
favorite things whenever I'm looking at like business operations, right? Or anything. When I'm digging into like processes of like how does a patient flow from the front desk to a provider, right? Things like that. Literally, if anything, if the reason is it's because that's how we've always done it,
yeah, no,
knowing that we need to redesign the
yeah,
process, or at least evaluate whether we need to redesign it, because just because we've done it this way for the last 15 years is a terrible reason to do something.
right. I mean, it's not necessarily a reason to throw it out, right? It could be that
Mhm.
we've decided that the friction involved in changing and the lack of familiarity in the new process is not worth not worth the mistakes. But that
Mhm.
should be a decision that's made deliberately, right? It's
Correct.
not one that should be made
Mhm.
by default. I mean, there's risk involved in change as well, right? I mean, but people don't think of it that way, right?
Yep.
People think of it as I don't want to be bothered changing it.
Mhm.
But certainly, I mean, circling back to the whole questions thing, I mean, I'm a big fan of what are the questions that people who are not experts in this field actually ask.
Mhm.
So one of the outcomes of that, so the working group, the sort of now on hiatus working group, was we sort of gave a sort of a sort of a crash course in big chunks of AI and whatnot to a bunch of public safety folk.
Mhm.
And then we asked them, okay, so what are the big concerns and questions you have now? And the idea here wasn't to figure out what are the most, what from a technical perspective, what are the biggest challenges? It's what are the things that the community is immediately receptive to, right?
Mhm.
Because one of the other things is that if we're trying to affect change, we're trying to improve the situation, right? If we go to someone and say, you should care about this risk, and they go, what? Huh?
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
mean, you're going to have an uphill battle, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if they're coming to you and they're saying, we're really worried about this thing,
Mhm.
now you have somewhere to start,
Yeah.
right? And now you have, it's not that you have buy-in, they're already putting their money on the table and saying, please take it,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so, um, so in a sense, that whole, asking questions thing is important as well, not just to help you understand your thing, but to
Mhm.
also understand how this is then going to be contextualized by the other stakeholders involved,
Mhm.
right? Someone asking you a question is giving you an immense amount of information.
Mhm. Oh,
Um,
and how
and
they answer it is how
I'm
they
sorry.
and sorry, and how they answer it is also the same, right? Like
Yeah.
I always, I think, like whenever I interview people, I don't ask specific questions. It's all open-ended because I want the person to start talking and telling you about them and all. Like they'll tell you everything you need to know if you're selling something, close them. If you're interviewing them, whether you should hire them or not, they'll overshare. And I mean that's all. I mean
Yeah.
that's where it's at, right?
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
kind of
that's
that's
how this
fun.
interview is going, right?
Yeah. Oh, I hadn't noticed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No.
No, it's
Um,
fascinating, man. I think, how much should we apply human psychology to AI systems, or or is that literally the extent of us, um, like, is it because they're like a reflection of us? Is there anything to that?
so it depends. And I mean, it really depends on what type of system we're talking about.
Mhm.
I mean, for me, um, I, I'm, I think that's most relevant when we're talking about systems that need to work with people, right?
Mhm.
Because ultimately, the behavior of the system in isolation is only part of the
Mhm.
equation when it comes to how effective the entire system is, right? Ultimately, if the system and the person together don't do the job, it's
Mhm.
not just the person's fault, right?
Mhm.
Um, so in that sense, you want a system that can get along well with people.
Yeah.
In the context of an AI system, I like the term, and this is there's a term explicability, And that is how explicable is this is the decision that it made, as in knowing just my own sort of common sense about the domain, did the system do something that seemed sensible?
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it made the best choice, right?
Yep.
Because if the system knows more than I do about what's going on, it could make a better choice that I look at and go, why did it do that?
Hmm.
Right? Because there's a bit of information I don't know.
Right.
Um, right. Um, but the thing is that if I'm supposed to be working with this system and I need to make split-second decisions as to whether to trust the system,
Hmm.
you could make a human psychology argument around should the system be doing something that's less optimal, but that is still correct, it's still okay, and that the human is more willing to go along with. And as humans, we do this all the time, right? We'll take a particular route in because it makes more sense, even though, if we're driving someone in to somewhere, even though we know that, this shortcut makes more sense, but it's going to really throw them and get them really worried that I'm taking this
Hmm.
shortcut. So I'm going to go a more normal way,
Yeah.
right? Because I have more information. I know this shortcut's good, but they don't know that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's sort of the explicability bit of
Right. How
bit of
you
it is
get
sort of
from.
just one example.
Yeah.
Um, and but sometimes it might be I say, look, no, no, I'm taking this other way, and I'm taking this other way because I know that tonight there's a football game on,
Hmm.
and so that route is going to get completely jammed up. So now
Hmm.
there's an explanation about what the additional information is. Notice I don't actually need to tell them what type of football I'm playing that
I
is
was
being.
gonna say, I'm not sure what
Um,
game it is.
yeah, I
I
don't
don't
really
know what
know
sport
now
we're talking
either.
about now, but
I
hey,
It's sports ball of some sort, and I leave it at
there we
that.
go.
Um,
Hmm.
so there's I mean, now if you imagine that that's a system that a human system team, and that if there is some friction in the human questioning the system, then that now you've got a a decision, a trade-off that has to be made, for instance.
Yeah.
Um, and this goes broader than that too, right? Systems that are always confusing the people involved can be problematic.
Hmm.
Um, but on the other hand, wouldn't it be nice if these systems had a habit of teaching us, right? I mean, my work in my PhD was driving robots over rough terrain, but using a particular type, and the system was learning.
Hmm.
It was doing its own experiments and learning how this particular robot could drive over rough terrain. And one of the characteristics of the machine learning that I was using was that the system could then teach the human why these decisions were made,
Hmm.
right? You could ask the system, you could ask the system, hey, what are you going to do next? And the system might say, I'm about to turn left. And you go, well, why would you turn left there? I mean, it looks
Hmm.
clear, straight ahead. And the system will go, well, no, because to the left, you've got this, you've got this kind of characteristic. Up in front, though, I see this, and this is going to be a problem. And then you can ask the system, well, that looks okay to me. And then the system will go, in all these examples I saw in the
Hmm.
past where I saw something that looked like this,
Hmm.
the robot got stuck.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because it's just the right width that your wheels fall in.
Hmm.
Okay, I learned something. Um, so I mean that's a simple example, but
Of course.
the notion of having a machine learning system that's
Hmm.
able to teach in this manner. Given what imagine if your big neural network things nowadays, the amount of knowledge that's locked away in a whole bunch of neural network weights
Hmm.
that from a symbolic perspective is impenetrable to humans.
Hmm.
Imagine if that could be represented in a way that isn't intelligible, right? I mean,
Hmm.
um, one trick that I often use mentally when someone tells me when someone mentions deep learning,
Hmm.
mentally replace it with high performance linear algebra because
Hmm.
that's what it is,
Yeah.
right? With you've got a whole bunch of
Hmm.
activation units and things in there to make it do nonlinear things.
Hmm.
But at the heart of it, it's high performance linear algebra, and
Right.
it has with it all of the characteristics and drawbacks and advantages that linear algebra has in it,
Hmm.
including the whole, trying to get meaning out of it once you've got a big network, right? And
Hmm.
it becomes fairly impenetrable as your knowledge is spread throughout the network. And yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, there are attempts being made to sort of bring more context into this and to have more advanced systems and combinations of systems that are, informed by physics or whatever and so on to try and address some of this.
Hmm.
But having going back to the explanation and trust thing, if the system can explain and teach us something,
Hmm.
that would factor in heavily into, improving trust in the systems and also into building systems where you might use the deep learning system or some other form of machine learning to figure out the application, but then it pops out something that
Hmm.
now you can check, right? You
Yeah.
know, in a sense, for some applications, I care less. I don't care how you got to the answer as long as I can verify the answer is correct.
Yeah.
And there are applications where that's fine. If you have a system that can output a program to do a task for me, if I can verify that the program does the task, maybe I don't care how the program came about.
Yeah.
That might be okay as well.
Hmm.
So this comes back to the whole: what does explanation mean? What does trust mean? It what does AI even mean? It
Right.
differs from application and context to application and context, right?
Hmm.
Um,
It's awesome.
so yeah, and
Appreciate
and
that.
of course I've now taken that question and I've run a completely different direction, but never mind that.
Yeah, I feel like we've come full circle. Is there any, as we begin to close here, anything else we should touch on here, Raymond? Anything
Um,
else you think people should know?
I think that getting interested, getting involved, getting informed is always very important with this. And I
Hmm.
mean, people. I mean, there's always too many things for people to wrap their minds around. Goodness knows, I have enough trouble, just reading my emails in the morning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
it is
know that feeling.
yeah. Oh yeah. Um, but no, the but I think that the awareness is starting to catch up. It's taken a few missteps, such as a lot of the self-driving car issues that have come about.
Hmm.
But no, I think that we are, especially with awareness up and down the stakeholder chain and this and through society, the awareness is coming about. Regulators are starting to catch up. I think it's improving.
Hmm.
On that note, by the way, I should also stress, of course, that much as I have a NIST backdrop, everything I'm saying here is my own opinion and doesn't
Hmm.
represent that of NIST. I'm actually officially an employee of Johns Hopkins University, but I am
Hmm.
the uncrewed aircraft systems research lead at PSCR as a guest researcher.
So I can hold Hopkins accountable for everything you're saying.
I'm sorry.
So I said, so I can hold Hopkins accountable for everything you're saying.
Well, no, I mean,
I'm kidding, Dr. Raymond.
I'm just an academic.
I know.
I'm speaking purely for myself here.
Totally
Um,
understand.
but
I really
yeah.
appreciate it. And I listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on Robots and Red Tape today. I've really greatly enjoyed our conversation, and I've personally gotten a lot out of it, and I'm really hoping that everybody else does as well.
Hey, I really appreciate the invitation, and yeah, maybe we'll talk more in the future wherever I end up.
Looking forward to it, Raymond. Have a good one.